This is Fujifilm's latest compact mirrorless camera, and it is a camera that feels very targeted to one specific audience. So let's talk about it. It features an APS-C-sized X-Trans sensor capable of shooting up to 26 megapixel stills, 8 frames per second in still photos, and has an array of new autofocus improvements and powerful video features. Now we'll get to the autofocus at a later part in this video, but first I do want to spend some time on the video specifications because that's where I think this camera really shines and really has its value proposition. For video shooters, this camera tops out at 6.2K 30 frames per second in open gate recording, meaning it can take advantage of the entirety of the APS-C size sensor instead of shooting just from a cropped in portion of it. For 4K, it can go up to 60 frames per second, and in 1080p, there is a slow motion mode that is capable of up to 240 frames per second, or effectively 10x slow motion if you are playing back at 24 FPS. Video shooters that shoot primarily handheld will find it a bit disappointing that there is no in-body image stabilization, but Fujifilm does offer a wide array of optically stabilized lenses, and the X-M5 does have a digital stabilization as well. And when paired together, they do create some rather impressive results. Now that we've discussed the top line specs, let's talk about that target audience that Fujifilm is selling to with the X-M5. Because if you look at those top line numbers, it definitely feels like a camera that is targeted to kind of video power users, people that need a lot of video resolution. But then once you look a little bit further at some of the more unique features, and will probably be the more talked about features on this camera, it becomes very apparent that the X-M5 is targeted towards the modern content creator. First of all, the X-M5 features a fully articulating LCD screen that is touchscreen capable for both shooting or controlling settings. Specifically for vloggers, there is a dedicated vlog mode now that is its own little setting on the settings dial. Effectively, it creates a user interface on the LCD that is specifically tailored to the needs of vloggers. On top of that, for creators that primarily create short form content specifically for vertical viewing, such as on TikTok or Instagram Reels, there is now a vertical 9:16 1080p aspect ratio that you can shoot in while holding the camera horizontally. So a much more natural feeling way of holding the camera, but still allowing you to shoot at full 1080p without having to crop in at a later time to get that vertical aspect ratio. Again, specifically for short form content creators, there is also a short form video mode that will shoot in the 1080p vertical aspect ratio, but limit your shooting time to 15, 30, or 60 seconds long with a timer displayed on the screen to let you know how much time you have left. And on top of that, Fuji now also offers a low resolution, specifically 8 megabit per second 1080p shooting mode for those of you that want to shoot content and then immediately upload it to social platforms. Once you take a look at the addition of those features, this feels like a camera that is specifically targeted towards the modern content creator. Now, since we're talking about Fujifilm cameras, we have to talk about film simulations. It's one of the things that has made Fujifilm cameras so incredibly popular and unfortunately so difficult to get your hands on now, especially cameras within this price point. And the Fujifilm X-M5 is no stranger to Fujifilm's film simulations. The top left dial on the X-M5 is dedicated solely to switching between film simulations, with 9 pre-programmed ones and 3 custom ones that you can save to your liking. In addition to the dedicated film simulation dial, on the shooting mode dial, there are 4 custom setting options that you can pre-program with your own unique film simulation recipes. While we're talking about the film simulation dial, this is a good point in the video to discuss the form factor and size of this camera. Because as you can see, as I'm holding it in my hand, it is incredibly small. Now, for some, a small form factor is going to be really useful, especially for those vloggers and travel content creators that don't want to lug around a giant photo kit. For those that value portability and compactness, the X-M5 will be incredibly appealing. However, due to its size and the inclusion of that film simulation dial, you do lose some of the other dials on the top of the camera that Fujifilm is known for, specifically the shutter speed and ISO dials. For those of you that are looking for a more vintage 35mm film camera shooting experience, that is going to be lost with the X-M5. This is a camera that feels incredibly digital. In addition to that, the small form factor can be a little bit uncomfortable to hold and to use for extended periods of time. Now that we've made a little bit of a tangent to talk about the form factor, let's talk about photo performance and specifically autofocus. This is an area that Fujifilm has seemed to lag behind its competition for quite some time. And with the newer X-Trans sensors and X-Processor 5, it definitely seems like Fujifilm has made an incredible leap, at least from what I've seen online. Personally, I have not used a Fujifilm camera up until now, and what I can say about the autofocus is that it is incredibly fast and, for the most part, quite accurate. There were definitely some misses along the way. It's not quite on par as the autofocus giants such as Sony or Canon. For your everyday shooting needs, especially for things like street photography and landscape photography and travel photography, you will find that the autofocus is enough to meet all of your needs, even for some limited portrait work. There is eye and face detection and there is eye and face autofocus tracking. My experience with it has been quite good. There are also options for subject detection tracking that makes use of the X-Processor 5's AI features. For subject tracking, you have the option to choose between animal, bird, automobile, motorcycle, and bike, airplane, or train tracking. Now personally, I've not spent a ton of time testing that out, although I'm sure there are plenty of videos out there testing the performance of the subject tracking on the Fujifilm X-M5. If that is something that you would like to see, please leave a comment down below and I'd be happy to test it out. Now, one of the biggest complaints that I've seen about the X-M5, and actually the reason I was able to get this camera as soon as I did, is the lack of an EVF or electronic viewfinder. Due to its small size, the only way you can see what you are taking a picture of is by using the articulating LCD screen. Now, for my intents and purposes, I did find this a little bit clunky, but there are some out there that absolutely hate the lack of an EVF, and I totally understand that. The person I bought this camera off of actually was selling it solely because of the lack of an EVF. Now, if you can get past that and accept that you're only gonna be able to use the LCD screen, and especially on bright days, you may find yourself sitting here cupping your hand over the screen so you can get a better view of it, it's still a pretty good value for what you get. So with all of that out of the way, what are my first impressions of the Fujifilm X-M5 after the first couple of weeks of shooting with it? I've been toying with the idea of getting a Fujifilm for quite some time now, and I've always found them to be a little bit overpriced for what I was going to use them for. At first, when I bought this camera, I was quite shocked by how small it was. I found initially when I was using it that the buttons were a little bit too small to comfortably use, but they were sensitive and protruded out of the camera enough that I would often find myself accidentally hitting them. I would often find myself accidentally hitting the front scroll wheel and adjusting either ISO or aperture, or accidentally hitting shutter speed on the back, maybe accidentally moving the focal point with the little joystick on the back. But the more I used it, the more I fell in love with it. And the biggest reason is simply the image quality and the colors that you get from those film simulations. Whenever I edit my photos, I tend to edit with a slight filmic style, although not quite as stylized as some of the options on the Fujifilm X-M5. But I definitely take some of the principles and the look from old 35mm film as kind of inspiration for my edits. Having them right at my fingertips and having really quite pleasing recipes and film simulations in this tiny little on-the-go camera means that I don't have to do as much work for those photos to be ready. Simply put, this camera allows me to just get up and go out and create. I don't have to think as much about when I can bring this camera with me. I can basically take it with me at all times. Now, as a hybrid shooter, having the video capabilities of the X-M5 at my fingertips in such a small, light package is also a huge plus. It's there if I ever want to shoot a quick shot of something as I'm walking down the street, and I don't have to bring a whole production with me like with the Sony. So overall, my first impressions of the X-M5 is that this tiny little creator-focused camera has officially won me over and brought me into the Fujifilm ecosystem. Now, this video wasn't super in-depth. We didn't go into a ton of like testing or anything like that of the X-M5, so if that is something that you are interested in, please make sure you hit that subscribe button because I definitely have some more things coming out with the X-M5. But with that, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. If you want to see more photography related content like this, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.